The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged mountains of Afghanistan, as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his rifle scope for what he thought would be another routine patrol. The 28-year-old sniper had been deployed with SEAL Team 7 for 8 months, and the weight of countless missions pressed heavy on his shoulders. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision as he checked his equipment one final time. Rodriguez had grown up in a small Texas town where hunting with his grandfather taught him patience and accuracy. Those childhood lessons had evolved into deadly skills that made him one of the most feared snipers in the Navy SEALs. His teammates called him Ghost because of his ability to disappear into any landscape and eliminate targets from impossible distances. The mission briefing had been straightforward. Intelligence suggested a high-value Taliban commander was meeting with foreign fighters in a remote village nestled between 2 mountain peaks. The terrain was treacherous, with narrow paths carved into cliffsides and caves that had hidden warriors for centuries. Rodriguez's job was to provide overwatch while his team moved in to capture or eliminate the target. As the team prepared to move out, Rodriguez noticed something different in the air. The local birds had gone silent, and the usual morning sounds of the village below seemed muted. His instincts, honed by years of combat, whispered warnings that he couldn't quite identify. The intelligence report had mentioned light resistance, but Rodriguez's gut told him they were walking into something much more dangerous. Lieutenant Commander Jake Sullivan, the team leader, gathered his men for final instructions. Sullivan was a by-the-book officer who had earned respect through decisive action and genuine care for his soldiers. He trusted Rodriguez's instincts more than most official reports, having seen the sniper's uncanny ability to sense danger before it materialized. The team consisted of 8 elite warriors, each with specialized skills that made them formidable in any situation. There was Petty Officer Chen, the communications expert who could establish contact with base from anywhere. Sergeant Williams handled explosives with an artist's touch, while Corporal Jackson's medical training had saved more lives than anyone could count. Each man knew that their survival depended on absolute trust in their teammates. As they began their approach to the village, Rodriguez took position on a rocky outcrop that provided clear sight lines to multiple approach routes. His Barrett M82 rifle was zeroed perfectly, and he had memorized every potential hiding spot within 1,000 yards. The morning was crystal clear, with visibility extending for miles across the harsh landscape. Through his scope, Rodriguez watched the village come to life. Women carried water jugs, children played in dusty streets, and elderly men gathered in small groups to discuss the day ahead. Everything appeared normal, but that nagging feeling in his stomach continued to grow stronger. Years of combat had taught him to trust these instincts above all else. The SEAL team moved like shadows through the rocky terrain, using hand signals to communicate as they approached their target building. Rodriguez provided constant updates through his radio headset, calling out clear paths and potential threats. His voice was calm and steady, a reassuring presence that kept his teammates focused on their mission. Suddenly, Rodriguez spotted movement in a window that shouldn't have contained anyone according to their intelligence. A glint of metal caught the morning sun for just a moment before disappearing back into shadow. His finger moved to his trigger as he focused his scope on the suspicious location, but whatever he had seen was now gone. The team was now within striking distance of their target. Sullivan raised his hand to signal the final approach when Rodriguez's radio crackled to life. His voice cut through the static with urgent precision as he reported what his trained eyes had discovered. The village wasn't just hiding one Taliban commander. It was crawling with heavily armed fighters who had turned every building into a potential fortress. Rodriguez realized they had been fed false intelligence that was designed to lure them into a carefully planned ambush. The high-value target they were hunting was actually the bait in a trap that could annihilate his entire team. As he prepared to warn his teammates about the true nature of their situation, the first shots rang out from multiple directions, and the quiet morning erupted into deadly chaos. The first burst of automatic gunfire shattered the morning silence as muzzle flashes erupted from windows, rooftops, and hidden positions throughout the village. Rodriguez's worst fears materialized as he watched his teammates dive for cover behind whatever protection they could find. The Taliban had turned the entire settlement into a killing zone. with overlapping fields of fire that left no safe routes for escape. Through his scope, Rodriguez counted at least 30 enemy fighters, far more than the intelligence report had suggested. They were well armed with AK-47s, rocket-propelled grenades, and heavy machine guns positioned to cut down anyone attempting to retreat. The ambush had been planned with military precision, suggesting the involvement of experienced foreign fighters who understood SEAL tactics. Sullivan, quote-s voice, crackled through the radio as he tried to coordinate his scattered team while bullets whined overhead. Ghost, we need immediate fire support on the building at your 2 o'clock. Multiple shooters in the upper windows. Rodriguez swung his rifle toward the target and squeezed the trigger. The .50 caliber bullet punched through the concrete wall, and one of the muzzle flashes went silent. But for every enemy fighter Rodriguez eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. The Taliban had prepared for this moment, stockpiling weapons and ammunition throughout the village. Children and elderly civilians had been evacuated days earlier, leaving only hardened fighters who were willing to die for their cause. Petty Officer Chen struggled to establish communications with their base, while pinned down behind a crumbling stone wall. Enemy fire had damaged his radio equipment, and the mountainous terrain made it difficult to reach headquarters even under normal circumstances. Without air support or reinforcements, the 8-man team was facing impossible odds. Sergeant Williams attempted to use his explosives to create a distraction, but enemy snipers had marked his position. Every time he tried to move, bullets struck the ground around him with deadly accuracy. The Taliban fighters were patient and disciplined, content to wait for the Americans to expose themselves while conserving their ammunition for killing shots. Rodriguez, quote-s position on the rocky outcrop provided excellent visibility but also made him a prime target. Enemy fighters had spotted his muzzle flashes and were beginning to concentrate their fire on his location. Chunks of rock exploded around him as bullets struck the stone, sending sharp fragments cutting through the air. The sniper realized that his elevated position, while tactically advantageous, was becoming increasingly dangerous. He needed to relocate before the enemy pinpointed his exact location, but moving would mean temporarily abandoning his teammates who depended on his covering fire. It was a decision that could determine whether any of them survived the next hour. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan made the difficult choice to order a fighting withdrawal to a more defensible position. The team would have to cross 200 yards of open ground while under constant fire from multiple directions. Rodriguez would need to provide covering fire for each movement, picking off enemies who tried to target his retreating teammates. The withdrawal began with Jackson and Williams sprinting toward a cluster of boulders, while Rodriguez systematically eliminated threats along their route. His shots were precise and deadly, each bullet finding its mark with mechanical efficiency. But the volume of return fire was overwhelming, and he knew his ammunition wouldn't last forever. As his teammates reached temporary safety, Rodriguez prepared to make his own move to a new position. He had identified a cave entrance about 50 yards to his left that would provide better protection, while maintaining good shooting angles. The move would be dangerous, requiring him to expose himself to enemy fire while carrying his heavy rifle and equipment. Rodriguez took a deep breath and began his dash toward the cave. Halfway across the open ground, an RPG exploded just behind him, and the blast wave threw him forward into the rocks. His body slammed against the stone with bone-crushing force, and everything went black as debris rained down around his motionless form. Through the smoke and dust, Sullivan watched in horror as his best sniper disappeared beneath a pile of rubble. There was no movement from Rodriguez's position, and no response to desperate radio calls. The enemy fire intensified as the Taliban fighters realized they had eliminated the American marksmen who had been thinning their ranks. With Ghost apparently dead and their situation becoming more desperate by the minute, Sullivan knew his remaining team members had only one option left. He reached for his radio to call for emergency extraction, knowing that backup might arrive too late to save any of them from the carefully orchestrated ambush that had claimed their most valuable asset. Blood trickled down Rodriguez's forehead as consciousness slowly returned to his battered body. The explosion had thrown him into a narrow crevice between two massive boulders, creating a natural shelter that had saved his life while making him invisible to the enemy fighters above. His rifle lay beside him, miraculously undamaged despite the violent impact that had knocked him unconscious. Pain shot through his ribs as he tried to move, and Rodriguez realized he had sustained significant injuries in the blast. His left shoulder felt dislocated, and something warm was flowing down his back that he suspected was blood from shrapnel wounds. But his hands still worked, his eyes could focus, and most importantly, his rifle was still functional. Through the gap in the rocks, Rodriguez could hear his teammates' desperate radio calls for backup. Sullivan's voice was strained as he reported their situation to headquarters, describing heavy casualties and requesting immediate air support. The enemy fire had intensified since Rodriguez's apparent death, and his teammates were running dangerously low on ammunition. The sniper realized that his presumed death might actually be an advantage. The Taliban fighters had become bolder, exposing themselves more freely now that they believed the American marksman was no longer a threat. From his concealed position, Rodriguez had clear shots at several enemy positions that had been too dangerous to engage earlier. Rodriguez carefully adjusted his rifle scope, compensating for the slight tremor in his hands caused by the concussion from the explosion. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, reminding him that patience and precision were more valuable than speed when lives hung in the balance. He would have to make every shot count with his limited ammunition supply. The first target was a Taliban machine gunner who had been terrorizing his teammates from a rooftop position. The fighter stood confidently behind his weapon, spraying automatic fire without concern for return shots. Rodriguez's bullet caught him center mass and the heavy machine gun fell silent as its operator crumpled to the ground. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks as fighters tried to locate the source of the shot that had killed their machine gunner. They scanned the rubble where Rodriguez had fallen, but the angle of the shot seemed impossible from that location. The psychological impact was immediate. The ghost sniper had apparently returned from the dead. Sullivan, S team seized. The momentary confusion to advance to better positions. Chen managed to establish partial communications with headquarters, reporting their desperate situation and requesting immediate reinforcements. The message was broken and intermittent, but headquarters understood that Team 7 was in serious trouble and needed help fast. Rodriguez continued his deadly work from the shadows, picking off enemy fighters who exposed themselves while searching for his new position. Each shot was calculated to create maximum psychological impact while conserving his limited ammunition. The Taliban fighters began to panic as their comrades fell to an invisible enemy they couldn't locate or engage. The enemy commander, a seasoned fighter named Rashid who had survived multiple encounters with American forces, recognized what was happening. He barked orders in Pashto, trying to restore discipline among his men while organizing a systematic search for the hidden sniper. Rashid had faced American marksmen before and knew their tactics and capabilities. Rodriguez identified the enemy commander through his scope and lined up what would be the most important shot of the engagement. Eliminating Rashid would throw the Taliban fighters into complete disarray and give his teammates their best chance of survival. But the commander was partially concealed behind a concrete barrier, requiring a precise shot through a narrow gap. As Rodriguez prepared to take the shot, his radio crackled with Chen's voice reporting that backup was still at least 20 minutes away. 20 minutes was an eternity in combat, especially when facing overwhelming numbers with limited ammunition. The SEAL team would need a miracle to hold out that long against determined enemy fighters. The sniper steadied his breathing and aligned his crosshairs on the narrow opening where Rashid's head occasionally appeared. Years of training and natural talent converged in this moment as Rodriguez prepared to eliminate the tactical brain, coordinating the ambush against his teammates. But before he could squeeze the trigger, Rodriguez heard the distinctive whine of incoming mortars. The Taliban had called in indirect fire support to flush out the hidden American positions. The first explosions walked across the battlefield, each one closer to his teammates' defensive positions. Rodriguez realized that eliminating the enemy commander wouldn't be enough to save his team. The mortars would eventually find their targets and his wounded teammates couldn't move fast enough to avoid the incoming artillery. He needed to do something more dramatic to turn the tide of battle before the reinforcements arrived, to find only bodies scattered across the rocky landscape. The mortar rounds continued to rain down around his teammates' positions, as Rodriguez made a desperate decision that went against every rule of sniper warfare. Instead of remaining hidden and picking off individual targets, he would expose himself to draw enemy fire away from his wounded comrades. It was a calculated sacrifice that would likely cost him his life, but it might buy his team enough time for reinforcements to arrive. Rodriguez crawled out of his protective crevice, his injured body protesting every movement as he positioned himself on a more exposed rocky ledge. From this new location, he had clear shots at multiple enemy positions, but would be visible to return fire from dozens of Taliban fighters. His grandfather had always told him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but action in spite of fear. The first shot from his new position dropped an enemy mortar spotter, who had been directing the artillery fire onto his teammates. The Taliban fighters immediately began scanning the rocky slopes, searching for the source of the shot that had seemed to come from a different location than before. Their confusion bought Rodriguez precious seconds to engage additional targets. His second shot eliminated a fighter who was flanking Sullivan's position with an RPG launcher. The rocket-propelled grenade would have devastated his teammate's defensive position, but now it exploded harmlessly into empty rocks. Rodriguez was methodically dismantling the coordinated attack that had been designed to overwhelm his team through superior numbers and firepower. Enemy fighters began concentrating their fire on Rodriguez's new position as muzzle flashes gave away his location. Bullets sparked off the rocks around him, and he felt the heat of near misses passing inches from his head. But his training had prepared him for this moment, and his hands remained steady despite the incoming fire. Rodriguez S radio headset crackled with Sullivan's amazed voice. "Ghost, we thought you were dead. Your position is too exposed. Pull back immediately." But Rodriguez ignored the order, knowing that retreating now would allow the enemy to resume their coordinated assault on his teammates. He had committed to this course of action, and he would see it through to the end. The sniper's next target was Rashid, the enemy commander who was trying to reorganize his scattered fighters. The Taliban leader had taken cover behind a thick concrete wall, but Rodriguez had noticed a pattern in his movements. Every few minutes, Rashid would lean out to observe the battlefield and shout orders to his men. When Rashid's head appeared in the gap, Rodriguez was ready. The .50 caliber bullet punched through the concrete edge and found its target, eliminating the tactical mind that had been coordinating the ambush. The effect on enemy morale was immediate and devastating as fighters began to panic without their leader's steady commands. But Rodriguez's exposed position had made him a priority target for every enemy fighter in the village. Automatic weapons fire converged on his location from multiple directions, forcing him to seek whatever minimal cover the rocky ledge provided. Chunks of stone exploded around him as bullets struck with increasing accuracy. An enemy sniper, positioned in a distant building, had finally gotten a clear shot at Rodriguez's position. The Taliban marksman was skilled and patient, waiting for the perfect moment to eliminate the American who had been decimating their ranks. Rodriguez saw the glint of the enemy scope just as the other sniper squeezed his trigger. The bullet grazed Rodriguez's helmet, spinning him around and sending him tumbling behind a boulder. Blood flowed from a deep cut across his scalp, and his vision blurred from the near miss that had come within millimeters of ending his life. The enemy sniper had marked his position and would be ready for his next appearance. Through his damaged radio headset, Rodriguez could hear helicopter rotors in the distance. The backup that Chen had requested was finally approaching, but they would need a clear landing zone to extract the wounded team. The Taliban fighters still controlled most of the village and would have time to prepare anti-aircraft weapons if given the opportunity. Rodriguez realized that his mission had evolved beyond providing covering fire for his teammates. He needed to create enough chaos and confusion among the enemy ranks to allow the rescue helicopters to approach safely. That meant abandoning his defensive position and going on the offensive against overwhelming odds. Fighting through waves of pain from his injuries, Rodriguez gathered his remaining ammunition and prepared for what he knew would be his final engagement. The Taliban fighters expected him to remain hidden and continue sniping from long range. They weren't prepared for a wounded American to launch a single-handed assault against their fortified positions. As the sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, Rodriguez took a deep breath and began his desperate gambit to save his teammates. Every instinct screamed against leaving his covered position, but sometimes survival required the kind of calculated insanity that separated elite warriors from ordinary soldiers. The ghost was about to become very visible and very dangerous. Rodriguez abandoned his sniper rifle and drew his sidearm as he began moving through the rocky terrain toward the village. His injuries slowed him down, but adrenaline and determination drove him forward as bullets whined overhead. The Taliban fighters were so focused on his last known position that they didn't immediately notice his flanking movement through the scattered boulders. The first enemy position he reached was a machine gun nest that had been terrorizing his teammates for the past hour. 3 Taliban fighters were concentrated on maintaining suppressive fire toward Sullivan's team, completely unaware that death was approaching from their blind spot. Rodriguez's pistol barked 3 times in rapid succession, and the machine gun fell silent forever. Seizing the captured weapon, Rodriguez turned it on the next enemy position before the fighters could react to his presence. The heavy machine gun chattered as he swept it across a building where muzzle flashes had been winking like deadly stars. Windows exploded in showers of glass and concrete as his sustained fire drove the occupants into cover or worse. The psychological effect of Rodriguez's assault was profound. Taliban fighters who had been confidently advancing on his teammates' positions suddenly found themselves under attack from an unexpected direction. Radio chatter filled the airwaves as confused fighters tried to understand how a single wounded American had penetrated their defensive perimeter. Sullivan's voice crackled through Rodriguez's earpiece with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Ghost, what the hell are you doing? Fall back to a defensible position." But Rodriguez knew there was no falling back now. He had committed to this desperate gambit, and stopping would mean certain death for his entire team. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder as the rescue aircraft approached the landing zone. But Rodriguez could see Taliban fighters positioning RPGs and heavy machine guns to engage the incoming aircraft. The rescue would fail unless he could eliminate or suppress those anti-aircraft weapons. Before the helicopters came into range, moving from position to position like a deadly phantom, Rodriguez used captured weapons and improvised explosives to systematically destroy enemy strongpoints. His years of training had prepared him for exactly this type of close-quarters combat, but he had never attempted it while seriously wounded and outnumbered, 30-1. An enemy fighter appeared around a corner with an AK-47, but Rodriguez was faster. His knife found the man's throat before he could raise his weapon, and Rodriguez took his rifle and ammunition. Every enemy weapon he captured extended his ability to continue the fight and protect his teammates from the approaching rescue aircraft. The Taliban's defensive coordination was collapsing as Rodriguez's rampage continued. Fighters were abandoning their assigned positions to hunt for the American ghost who seemed to appear and disappear at will. Their disciplined ambush was deteriorating into a confused manhunt that left his teammates free to consolidate their defensive positions. Chen's radio finally established clear communications with the incoming helicopters. Thunderbird 1, this is Viper 7. Landing zone is hot with enemy anti-aircraft weapons. Recommend you hold at distance until we can suppress defensive fire. The pilot acknowledged and began circling outside the effective range of enemy weapons while Rodriguez continued his one-man war. Rodriguez reached the building where the enemy sniper had nearly killed him earlier. The Taliban marksman was still watching Rodriguez's abandoned position through his scope, unaware that his target had circled behind him. Rodriguez's captured AK-47 ended the sniper's vigil with a short burst that silenced another threat to the rescue operation. From the sniper's position, Rodriguez had a commanding view of the entire battlefield. He could see his teammates maintaining their defensive perimeter, while Taliban fighters searched frantically for his location. The rescue helicopters waited just beyond the mountains, ready to swoop in as soon as the landing zone was secure enough for extraction. But Rodriguez's luck was running out. His ammunition was nearly exhausted. His injuries were slowing him down, and the remaining Taliban fighters were beginning to coordinate their search efforts. Enemy voices shouted coordinates in Pashto as they closed in on his general location from multiple directions. A group of 5 fighters appeared at the base of the building, their weapons ready as they began climbing the stairs toward Rodriguez's position. He had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached his floor, and his rifle held only a few remaining rounds. The rescue helicopters were tantalizingly close, but they might as well have been on another planet. Rodriguez made his final preparations as enemy footsteps echoed in the stairwell below. He had done everything possible to save his teammates and create an opportunity for successful extraction. Now it was time to make his last stand in a way that would ensure the Taliban fighters were too busy dealing with him to threaten the incoming rescue aircraft. The Ghost prepared to become very visible one final time, knowing that his sacrifice would give his brothers the chance to return home safely to their families. Sometimes the greatest victory required the ultimate sacrifice, and Rodriguez was ready to pay that price. Rodriguez heard the enemy fighters reaching the floor below him as he positioned himself behind an overturned table that would provide minimal protection. His remaining ammunition consisted of 3 rifle rounds and 1 fragmentation grenade that he had taken from a fallen Taliban fighter. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough to complete his mission. The first enemy fighter appeared at the top of the stairs, his AK-47 ready as he scanned the room for targets. Rodriguez's bullet dropped him instantly, but the gunshot revealed his exact position to the remaining 4 fighters who were right behind their fallen comrade. Return fire immediately began chewing through his inadequate cover as wood splinters filled the air around him. Rodriguez pulled the pin on his grenade and prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. But as he raised his arm to throw the explosive device, the distinctive sound of American helicopter gunships filled the air outside the building. The rescue aircraft had arrived and were engaging enemy positions throughout the village with devastating precision. The Taliban fighters pursuing Rodriguez were caught between his position and the incoming helicopter fire. Rockets exploded throughout the building as the aircraft methodically destroyed every enemy strongpoint they could identify. The structure shook violently as walls collapsed and debris rained down through the floors. In the chaos of the helicopter assault, Rodriguez saw his opportunity. The surviving enemy fighters were more concerned with finding cover from the aerial bombardment than with capturing him. He moved through the smoke and dust toward a window that faced away from the main battle, his injuries making every step an effort of pure willpower. The rescue helicopters had cleared a path for the extraction aircraft, which was now approaching the landing zone where his teammates waited. Rodriguez could see Sullivan helping wounded team members toward the helicopter, while Chen provided security with his remaining ammunition. They were going to make it home because of his desperate gambit to distract and disrupt the enemy forces. Rodriguez reached the window just as the building began to collapse from the sustained helicopter fire. The Taliban fighters who had been pursuing him were buried somewhere in the rubble below. Their hunt ended by American air power that had arrived at exactly the right moment. His sacrifice had been intended to buy time, but it had resulted in complete mission success. The sniper rappelled down the exterior wall of the crumbling building, using techniques learned in SEAL training to descend, despite his injuries. Each movement sent waves of pain through his damaged body, but the sight of his teammates boarding the rescue helicopter gave him strength to continue fighting gravity and exhaustion. Sullivan looked up in amazement as Rodriguez stumbled across the landing zone toward the waiting aircraft. "Ghost, you magnificent bastard! We thought you were gone for sure." The team leader grabbed his wounded sniper and helped him toward the helicopter as enemy fire erupted from the few remaining Taliban positions. The rescue aircraft lifted off. Just as the last enemy fighters emerged from their hiding places to make a final desperate assault on the landing zone. But they were too late. The SEALs were airborne and climbing rapidly toward safety. Rodriguez collapsed onto the helicopter floor as medics began treating his numerous wounds, while his teammates looked on with respect and gratitude. Chen established communications with headquarters to report mission status. "Base, this is Viper 7. All team members extracted successfully with multiple wounded requiring immediate medical attention. Primary target eliminated along with approximately 30 enemy combatants. Recommend Rodriguez for immediate medical consideration. His actions saved the entire team." As the helicopter carried them away from the battlefield, Rodriguez looked back at the burning village where he had fought the most important battle of his life. The Taliban ambush had been perfectly planned and executed, but they hadn't counted on the determination of American warriors who refused to abandon their brothers regardless of the odds. Lieutenant Commander Sullivan sat beside his wounded sniper as military medics worked to stabilize his injuries. "Ghost, what you did back there was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the craziest. Maybe both." Rodriguez managed a weak smile as pain medication began to take effect. "Just doing my job, sir. Nobody gets left behind." The rescue helicopter climbed higher into the Afghan sky, carrying 8 wounded but alive Navy SEALs toward safety and medical treatment. Behind them, smoke rose from the village where Rodriguez's one-man assault had turned certain defeat into miraculous victory. The Ghost had proven that sometimes the dead could indeed rise again to protect their brothers, and that courage could overcome impossible odds when lives hung in the balance. Years later, Rodriguez would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions that day. But he always insisted that the real heroes were his teammates who had held their positions under impossible circumstances while waiting for backup that almost came too late. The bond forged in that Afghan village would last for the rest of their lives, a testament to the power of brotherhood and sacrifice in the face of overwhelming adversity.